Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Coaching. Thanks for joining us. And our guest today, we were just talking, and he's somebody I feel like I know, but never met. Jamy Bechler. Jamy, thanks for joining me today.
I appreciate it, Rob. Big fan of yours, even though, like you say, we've never met. Big fan of what you're doing there at Friends University and what you're doing in college athletics. You've definitely done some great things.
Thank you. Now you've done a ton of things from coaching to AD to consulting. Give everybody kind of the 1 minute, kind of your background, what you've done, what you're doing now.
Yeah, I was a college coach for about 20 years, mainly at the NAIA level. And then I was a high school AD at a school with a large athletic department in Indiana, fifth largest gym in the world. So as a basketball coach, as a basketball guy, that was awesome to be at a place that had a huge gymnasium, seated over 7,000 people, won the most boys basketball state titles in Indiana. So when you think of Hoosier hysteria or Hoosier basketball, it was great to be, as a basketball coach, to be at a place like that. And I've started my own business about 7 or 8 years ago, a consulting business, leadership business. So we do a lot of public speaking. We work with a lot of athletic departments, coaching staffs, sports teams. And then a few months ago, I even went back and was an interim athletic director at a college in Kentucky with 27 sports, 700 athletes. And part of that was boots on the ground, actually moving there myself, living in an Airbnb and being the interim AD. But we also do coaching search. So that's one of the things we do as well. Coaching athletic department searches mainly for small colleges. So our philosophy is trying to find a great culture or have a great culture. One of the best ways to do that is by finding a coach to start with, as you well know there in your work as an athletic director at Friends University. So I don't know if that was a minute, but we'll wrap it up there.
You were close enough. And right before we recorded, we had an interesting kind of brief conversation about your last 6 months. Let's start there. So you were in it a long time, then you did consulting, and then you jumped back in as an interim AD. Curious, share what you learned from that experience after being out of it for a while.
It's a great reminder that we can have all this theory and it may be absolutely correct, but we forget that the human element, we forget that sometimes, we're having to juggle a lot of balls. So I go and speak all the time to coaches, athletic departments, and I'll tell them maybe, hey, this is what you should say to a parent. This is what you should say to a disgruntled player or an athlete. This is what you should say to coaches who are having issues. And all those things are great, but oftentimes they're very isolated. They're in a bubble. They're in a silo. If all else is great in your life, this is what you can say. Well, oftentimes we rarely get this ideal condition or the ideal situation. We may be talking with the president, hang up the phone, talk to a coach, hang up the phone, have 2 kids waiting to come in your office. And all that stuff is things that I've known for the last few years, but you almost forget how real it is. And so it was great to be boots on the ground the last few months and really just serve as a reminder. Almost, you walk a mile in the coach's shoes, walk a mile in the AD's shoes again. Even though I had been in those roles before, you kind of forget that, going from school to school to school and just being a hired gun and being a mercenary and just coming in and, giving them 3 or 4 hours of great stuff, your best, the greatest hits. And you kind of forget that, it's simple. The stuff I'm saying is simple. Being an AD is simple. Being a coach is simple, but it's not easy at all.
Yeah.
The stuff, sometimes it's just very simple. And people are like, well, sometimes those who do, and those who can't consult, and it's not that I can't do this stuff. It's just, I don't want to do this stuff. I don't want to have to deal with this stuff all day long. So it was a good reminder of walking a mile in the shoes again and just getting back to that. So that, yeah, some of the stuff I say is simple sometimes, but it's not easy to execute, especially when emotions and all different kinds of things are hitting you.
Yeah, that's we were actually interviewing somebody at our church recently, and it was somebody that had worked at the church, went to another industry and was coming back. And that was my question to him. Actually, in the interview, I said, I want you to tell me 3 things that sucked about it when you were here before. Because we can glorify the past a little bit, and every job, it's messy, and you have to remember that. And yeah, I don't know. Does that ring true in your experience there?
Yeah, it really did, because maybe you don't get enough sleep at night and you're a little tired, or, for some people that drink coffee, I haven't had my coffee in the morning, or I haven't had my energy drink. Yes, there you go. Haven't had my coffee yet. And it's like, well, that's still no excuse. You've got to be on your game. You've got to have your A game. And when this kid comes in to complain about the coach, it's easy for us to sit around at Waffle House or IHOP with other ADs and other coaches and complain about kids these days, or complain about, oh yeah, these idiot kids, or these kids, they don't care about anything or whatever. Okay, that doesn't help when that kid, it's real to them and it's a problem for them. And you know what? They maybe don't know how to handle adversity. They don't know how to handle not getting your way. And yes, it's simple to say, well, they just need to suck it up. Well, okay, but how can they do that? And how do you be empathetic with that? And just some of the things that, I like to think that I'm pretty smart about some of this stuff and pretty wise about the things I say sometimes, but even I would get caught up with emotions, and I'll give you, without going into the details, I thought there was one meeting, I thought I was meeting with two young ladies on a sports team, and pretty much the whole team showed up for the meeting. Well, you've got this whole team coming in and you have to make this quick decision about, all right, am I going to turn them all around? Are we going to just meet with these two young ladies? How are we going to handle this? And so, those are the things that, yes, I could say in theory how you should handle it, but when you're really put into that situation and then you're weighing 4 or 5 other factors, with the context. Well, what is their coach like? Hey, what's the history of this program? What's the history of, X, Y, and Z, all that kind of stuff. There's so many dynamics and you have to think on your feet. And sometimes there's not a right answer. Sometimes there's just a, hey, let's make the best of this situation and let's try to be wise. But even with that, you get 10, 12, 15 people in a room, even if you're wise, there may be somebody that didn't like one thing that you said, or you didn't say something when you should have said something.
Yeah.
So all those things, I think are simple in theory sometimes, but it's not easy being a leader. It's not easy being an AD. It's not easy being a coach. It's not easy being a student athlete. And so we forget as coaches and ADs sometimes what it's like to be a student athlete. And sometimes, we are old man, get off my lawn. We're the old man yelling at clouds. Well, back in my day, well, we forget that we complained about our coaches too. Yep. And we forget that we weren't perfect, but we forget that. We're very similar to the kids nowadays. We had issues. We didn't like everything that a coach or our parent or somebody in our life did. And we didn't always react perfectly, but yet we act like, well, the kids nowadays should act perfectly. Oh, they're the problem. No, they're not the problem. They might be slightly different than we were, but still every generation has issues, and every generation doesn't know how to live life until they've lived life. It's not all that easy. And so it was good to get back on campus to a degree and be reminded of that.
Yeah, I'm jotting a few notes because there's a few routes I want to go with all you just said. If you don't mind, because I had that exact same situation a few years ago. Thought I was meeting with two. The whole team shows up. Let's trade stories here if you don't mind. How'd you handle it? As much as you can share without breaking.
Yeah, the meeting started about 5 minutes late because it took me about 5 minutes. I was bouncing it off the two assistant ADs who were going to be meeting with the two athletes as well. The two captains, I should say, of this team, and pretty much not the entire team, but a large part, about 12 people came in on a team of about 20. And it took me about 5 minutes to make a decision because I wanted to go through. I don't like taking too long to make a decision because, sometimes perfection can be the enemy of good and we overanalyze, but I wanted to go down the rabbit hole of practically what are some of the worst things if I turn this whole team away. And what I ended up deciding was, all right, if I turn this whole team away, there's probably going to be a number of these players that have grievances that they're going to complain about. And knowing the history of the program, I felt like, let's address these head on. And so we decided, we had a conference room there. We decided to go in. Now, what I did was I addressed mainly the two captains. I wanted the two captains to be the ones that talked the most. And I told them to start off with the whole team. I said, I wasn't expecting this. I'm a little frustrated that all of you would come in because this does look like. And then what I did was I didn't tell them what it looked like, but I asked them, what does this look like if you were in my position and nearly the whole team comes in? What would you be thinking as the head coach? And I wanted them to get to the point of almost like a witch hunt, almost like a bunch of people showing up at the gates with, you know, torches and stuff. And they kind of understood that. It doesn't mean that the meeting was perfect, but it was really just an air your grievances type thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, so we went down point by point some of the things, and without getting into details, you know, for the most part, it was a very good meeting. Those two captains really saw things differently and had a better perspective. But there was two young ladies in the meeting that didn't talk a lot, but they said a few things, and they did not like the meeting. So it was we addressed some of the issues that were brought up, and then it created some other issues. And so you can't be perfect sometimes. And so but when you have 10, 12 people that you're talking to, there's bound to be somebody that doesn't like what you say, or doesn't like that you didn't spend enough time on something that they said.
Yeah.
And so you've got to not necessarily walk on eggshells, but you've got to have your head on a swivel. You've got to be very wise. You've got to remove emotion from it, both from you, definitely from you. I can't go into a meeting with emotion, and I had a little bit of frustration.
Absolutely. As you should. Yeah.
But I probably needed to be even more calm than I was. But you also have to do all you can to minimize the emotion with those athletes, because it is emotional for them. They're irrational. They're going to see one thing as bigger than it probably is, and they're gonna you know, they might bring up stuff from 4 months ago.
Yeah.
And so all these little things become this big thing. And sometimes, you know, young adults, they don't know how to handle adversity or life or not getting their way. And so you've got to be empathetic to that. It doesn't mean that you let them get away with things, but you do have to talk through some stuff and understand they don't know how to handle things quite like you or I might handle things. And so that's maybe not a great answer to it, but I decided turning them all away would probably lead to another meeting. And it would probably lead to a number of people being upset, because as much as we'd like to rely on captains, if I had just met with those two captains, in my opinion, in that context, those two captains, I thought like they were good, you know, captains to a degree, but I didn't know if they would communicate our message the same way to all of them. So I felt like, hey, we're all here. Let's just hit this.
Yeah. A mentor of mine says there's no solutions, only trade-offs. And
Great.
Yeah, so my situation was a little different, where the spokesman came up and said, we want to meet with you as a team. And I thought about doing exactly like you did it, because I wanted everybody to hear the same thing, because there's always risk in that. But I actually decided to go the opposite way of, I will meet with every one of you, but it will be in groups of one or two, because not everybody will hear have their voice heard. And there's so many people of, oh, everybody thinks this. No, they don't. Even in your situation, there were 8 that didn't come to the meeting. So, I went the one-on-one route, and it turned out nobody, only like 2 others ended up wanting meetings, you know, but people are complex. It's hard.
Yeah. And, you know, I was prepared for the two young ladies coming in, and I thought I actually had, and this is probably pride cometh before the fall. I was pretty prideful of the approach I was going to take with those two young ladies, and I thought it was going to be really good. I thought our meeting was going to be great. And so I was a little disappointed when I saw all of them come in, because I was like, oh man, I had this great strategy, this great game plan. It reminds me years ago when I was a basketball coach, and I had this great game plan that was supposed to work. And then the other team totally did something that they've never done before. And it totally messed me up. And I was all flustered, you know, as a young first year head coach. And your game plan, I was too prideful with my game plan with those two young ladies.
Cool. Well, let me shift something else you said I really liked, and I want to get your thoughts on this. So I think I can't remember if it was a side conversation or on the podcast, but I was talking to Bruce Brown with Proactive Coaching, and we were kind of having the conversation, have kids changed or not? And he would say no. He says parents have changed, and that has changed the expectations of kids. I'd be somewhere in the middle, where I probably to a fault, blame social media for some of the changes that have happened. But I think at the core of kids, they want to be loved. They're more willing to challenge us to prove that, and then they're willing to listen. Where do you fall in that whole conversation of the kids have changed, or have they?
Yeah, Bruce Brown is pretty smart guy. He's been
Yeah.
around, seen a lot, so I definitely can't argue with an opinion that he has. I won't be able to articulate this very well, but I've heard that before. I don't really believe that kids have changed a whole lot to a degree. I believe that the environment has changed. Things around us have changed. There's different dynamics. But I mean, kids were rebelling years and years and years and hundreds and thousands of years ago. People have
Yep.
rebelled. People have been selfish. Today's generation is no different in terms of that. They just have different ways of showing it. There's different dynamics, different environments. But where I wonder sometimes, and this is where I can't articulate, is the thought that kids haven't changed, but parents have changed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about that either, because they're still great parents and they're still bad parents. And I can't believe in the 1950s there were no bad parents. And to get to this point where if you say, well, kids haven't changed, but parents have, at some point those parents would have been kids. And so I just don't see how those two necessarily line up, but I'm not articulating it very well. But, John Wooden, the legendary basketball coach at UCLA back in the 60s, he had to deal with people protesting. You had the Vietnam War and kids were literally getting killed on college campuses, while they were protesting. So I don't think that necessarily coaching today's kids is harder. It's just different. We do have the attention span issue. But there's always been something that's been a distraction.
Yeah.
Now the distraction comes maybe quicker and is more extreme now, but I think kids still run through the walls for people. I still think you can get a lot out of the kids. You just might have to adjust and adapt your coaching and your leadership style a little bit differently than maybe you did in the past. But I think everybody's always had to adjust and adapt. Social media definitely is an issue. But when that devil of a TV came around, way back in the day, that boob tube, that was a distraction. Maybe not a distraction right before practice, but it was a distraction in kids not going out and touching grass, kids not going out and playing and working out as much because they had this TV. And then probably people thought that about the radio too back in the day. There's always something. I think in anything, we just have to adjust. There's always going to be issues. You have to adjust. I think if you coach homeschool, if you coach a bunch of kids that don't have a lot of technology, I still think you're saying, well, kids these days. Yep. I just think that that's a convenient excuse. Find ways to reach people, find ways to inspire people. If I'm a coach and I have a 2-hour practice and I'm not prepared and I'm boring and I have kids sitting out most of the time, or it's just a terrible practice, I can't blame social media and I can't blame kids these days. No, that's my responsibility to find a way to engage our players. And I see way too many boring practices or even a boring speech. If I go and come to Friends University and talk with your student athletes in an auditorium, talk with your coaches in a workshop, and half of them are falling asleep, that's not because they didn't get enough sleep the night before. Oh, kids these days, or, oh, Friends University, their coaches don't care. No, it's because I was boring. I didn't keep them engaged. That's my responsibility.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that one of the changes is the onus is on us. There's more capturing their attention, and the onus on us is to engage. I'm glad you said that. I argue with people that all the time. I think that's on us, not on them. But there's one other thing you said. What was it? I do think so. For a while, I worked as a VP of student life and dean of students, so geeked out on student developmental research. And I do think there's a piece of kids are college sport, especially at the higher levels, are being professionalized. But we have these kids at such an interesting developmental stage where the first half of college is very self-focused. And how do you go from independent and interdependent with others and live in community So it's like in some ways we're trying to fast forward that developmental process, but they're still where they're at. So, and I don't know what to do with that. You know, you just do the best you can, but it does blur the lines a little bit.
Well, and I'm not the most educated person when it comes to academia,
Yeah.
but the development of the human brain, the frontal cortex, all this kind of stuff, just because these athletes, look like adults, get paid like adults in some aspects, perform like adults, doesn't mean that they're at that maturity level that
Yep.
matches up with their body sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they might be maturing, or they might have more access to information than ever before. They might have access to the ability to develop their brain quicker than in the past, but in some ways it's been dumbed down too. And so, there's more information available to us than ever before, but there's also more stuff that'll rot our brain
Yeah.
that we have access to than ever before. I mean, I was joking with my ninth grade, or my 15-year-old son, the other day, and I was like, I called him in. I'm like, Jalen, come here. Let me, you see what I'm watching? He's like, yeah, YouTube. I said, yeah, YouTube. I'm learning how to do things. I'm looking at some instructional stuff. I'm getting smarter, learning how to do this, as opposed to 8 hours a day of just watching 30-second clips at a time.
Yeah.
And that's old man, get off my lawn.
Mm-hmm.
That's me back in the old days. But, we have access to so much stuff, but we don't utilize it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But still, even with that then plays into when coaches talk about, well, kids these days, well, if they're watching 30-second stuff, if they keep scrolling on their phone, we can't go on and on and on as a basketball coach trying to lecture them for 10 minutes on the basketball court about something. They're going to tune that out. And I would even say I've seen so many practices, and I've been involved in these practices, especially as a young coach. When we have summer camps, all right, for young kids, we give them popsicles, we have fun games, we do all this stuff. We don't just lecture them the whole time, because we know these kids want to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be how they learn. But then when we get the college kids, we're like, oh, they're going to be mature enough, and we make it really boring. I'm not saying we have to have popsicles and ice cream all the time at our practices, but can we do something to make our practices more fun? We take it way too seriously. We take our classrooms way too seriously. I feel like most of our college and high school classrooms are that scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Ben Stein. Anybody, Bueller. Like, he's boring everybody. Make your classrooms fun. Engage them. Figure out a way to reach everybody. Those kids that you say don't care, that are in the back of the classroom just on their their phone texting all the time. Find out what will be interesting to them. Bring them into the discussion. Don't just teach out of the textbook or your PowerPoint from 10 years ago.
Yeah. So I'm going to segue a little bit, but I want to go to your coaching search side. So with Impactful Coaching Project, we talk about 3 C's: competence, care, constant. And the competence piece, it's the basic barrier entry. You have to know what you're talking about.
Yep.
But we're also saying you got to know the bad information out there that's on those 30-second scrolls that are marketed well, because that's what your kids are looking at. But I know a challenge I have when I'm hiring coaches, and it's outside like my expertise of the sports I know really well, is really trying to find, what does this person know what they're talking about, and can they teach it? I'm curious your thoughts on that and how you discern that in your role, because you're doing that a heck of a lot more than me on the search side.
Well, almost all of our searches are tough searches. They're the ones that Rob doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
We've had rugby, we've had, a lot of flag footballs, a lot of women's wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
either sports that are difficult or that are newer at the
Yeah.
college level. We had archery, and literally we were calling Bass Pro Shops to see if they knew people in the area that were good at archery or bow hunting, crazy things like that. But I've also called up a lot of people just to ask them and say, hey, listen, like, we're doing a rugby search right now. First time I've ever done rugby search. I've called up a number of people, not about taking the job, but just, hey, I don't know much about rugby. What do I need to know? What questions do I need to ask? So I try to ask a lot of questions
Mm-hmm.
and know that I don't know something. Um, I try to ask even a lot of questions to the candidate, like you were talking about, find out if they can teach, find out if they really know what they're doing. I like
Mm-hmm.
to ask a lot of open-ended questions as well. Certainly you can ask specific questions, if there's one or two really specific questions. So for instance, we did esports, an esports search, and you might ask a coach, how do you feel, or a director of esports, how do you feel about remote coaches? And some of your listeners may be like, what do you mean remote coaches? Well, esports is one of the few sports where they have remote assistant coaches, and you can do that. You can't do a remote coach in football. They're not going to teach you how to tackle,
Yeah.
in football remotely. But in esports, that's a thing. And I didn't know that until we started doing esports
Interesting.
searches.
Yeah.
And so you might ask them, have you used remote coaches? What are your feelings on remote coaches? You may ask them, one good question to ask, like for an esports coach, because if an esports coach, or I should say a director of esports, if they say, hey, I'm an expert at every sport, that's not someone you want to hire.
Yeah.
It's the same way a track coach. There's no track coach that's an expert at every track and field event. A shot putter and a 5K or 5,000 meter runner are going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So ask them, hey, Rob, what would be the sport, or what would be the title, the game that you're least familiar with or you don't do well with? And how do you then go about coaching that? How do you go about dealing with athletes that's their specialty, but it's not your specialty? And so that question alone, and certainly that's more esports related,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe you can extrapolate that out in other sports.
Yeah.
But that answer, if they're like, well, I know what I'm doing, well, no, you don't know what you're doing in everyone. So are they going to be humble and coachable? Are they going to be able to admit that they don't know every title?
Mm-hmm.
I know that was more of a specific thing. I apologize for going
No,
too specific there, but sometimes asking general questions, sometimes asking specific questions, but the main thing is asking questions and getting them talking
yeah. No,
about things.
I think there's a lot to take away from that, and I think it's. I'm speaking to somebody that doesn't have this background, but as recruiting's become one of the biggest skills you need to have in some ways, people that are trained to teach haven't pursued that as much, or they haven't been able to move through things, and I think that's a major loss. Because I mean, that's a skill we've started targeting as somebody with high school teaching experience, because you learn how to communicate, you learn how to manage a room, and I see that going away from college sports, and I think that's a loss.
Yeah, certainly. And John Wooden started off as a high school teacher, and I hate to be back in my day or go old school, but John Wooden is an amazing, to me, example of coaching. One, he always talked about, well, I'm not really coaching, I'm teaching. You're a teacher. Coaches are teachers. They're teaching life, or they're teaching a skill or whatever, but you've got to be able to relate to different people. And why I put John Wooden on a pedestal, certainly he's not perfect, but like John Wooden was able to relate to so many of his athletes, whether they were playing for him or on the bench. And so many of his athletes, even the ones that didn't play much, will speak so highly of him because he cared about them. And you take a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, for the longest time, was the leading scorer in the NBA. Well, about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, he wrote the book, Coach Wooden and Me, Our 50-Year Friendship. Now, the amazing thing about that to me is that a guy writes a book about his coach when they were about as far apart demographically or profile or identity as possible. One is tall, one's short, one's old, one's young, one's black, one's white, one's Protestant, one's Muslim, one's from the inner city, one's from, the country. They're on a demographic sheet, they're so far apart. And yet here's this guy writing a book about our 50-year friendship with someone. You don't have a 50-year friendship with someone if you don't have respect, if there's not trust there. They don't see eye to eye on many things, or they don't have a good starting point. But man, there's that respect there, that mutual respect. And that's how you build connection. That's how you build relationship. That's whether you're a teacher in a classroom or you're a teacher on the soccer pitch, the baseball field, whatever it is. You have to connect and build relationship with people. And you don't do that if you hang on to our differences, if you're only looking at differences, but you got to relate to them, you got to find out what makes people tick. And we don't do that as teachers. We don't do that as coaches enough. We don't do that as leaders.
Yep.
And so you talked about teaching, you talk about recruiting. I see so many college coaches that recruit, they send emails or they do things like they would do as a 45-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 35-year-old. And it's like, well, you're talking to a TikTok teenager. Yep. You have to adjust things. You're not going to be able to have a 15-minute phone conversation. You're not going to be able to send them a 7-paragraph email talking about your school. It might be a great email, but they're not even going to read it because they're looking at their phone and it's like, oh my gosh, what am I, in English class? This is like a dissertation. This is like a novel I got to read. We don't adjust, but we don't think about the people we're working with and interacting with and meet them on their level.
Yeah, well said. All right, I got two more things I want to go down some rabbit holes with, but I'm hopeful that we may need to have more conversations like this too. So one, curious, kind of learn more from your experience. Your tagline on everything I see is success is a choice. Curious learning the backstory on that, and if there was a defining personal moment or just, how that saying came to be so important to you.
It's, I'll admit I stole it from Rick Pitino. He wrote a book years and years and years ago. Success is a choice. I thought it was I liked the book. I thought it was an amazing title, and every team that I coached, that was kind of our tagline, was success is a choice. And then it became more and more about, I've always been somebody that places a high emphasis on personal responsibility. Sometimes my wife will say too much. Sometimes I'll be like, well, it's always choices, always decisions, Yes, sometimes environment, sometimes different things come into play. But for the most part, I believe very strongly that our individual choices all the time lead to our habits, and our habits lead to results, good or bad. And we're a result of our habits. We're the sum result of our habits, our choices. And so a year from now, we'll be better or worse based upon decisions we make today, tomorrow, and so on. And so I'm a big believer in that we always have choices. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always going to get the results we want just because we make the right choices. Sometimes life happens. Sometimes there's things outside our control. But I also look at it as being those choices, making as many right choices as possible will lead to positive habits. And at the end of the day, those positive habits will lead to more positive outcomes than negative outcomes. But, I think that way to myself all the time. I mean, I wear a wristband. I wear a rubber wristband every day. Success is a choice. And I try to remember that, people talk about mental toughness a lot. I don't think mental toughness is doing things right all the time or being perfect, but I think sometimes mental toughness is bouncing back quicker than you normally would have. I think resiliency sometimes is bouncing back or returning to normal as quick as possible. And that's going to vary for everybody. But what is your baseline? What is your consistency? What is normal? And then bouncing back to that as quick as possible. It doesn't mean that you don't have a bad thought. It doesn't mean that I do a lot on Twitter or on X. There are a lot of comments I will get that I just would want to respond back to and just hammer them. And it doesn't mean just because I might be mentally tough or because success is a choice that I never have those thoughts. It's that I snap out of it a little bit quicker than some people, and I delete that tweet before I hit send, where other people might hit the send button or post button or whatever. I'm able to bounce back or come back to, nope, this isn't what I'm about. This isn't what I want to do. Or, okay, I've got to rewrite this. So I'm able to bounce back, but that didn't happen when I was 16. And what I did when I was 16 was better than 13. And what I did at 21 was better than 16. So it's a process, and I'm big into the process and the journey stuff. So that was a little bit of a longer answer probably, but yeah, I stole it completely from Rick Pitino. And if he's listening, Rick, I'm sorry. I appreciate it.
Rick, if you're listening, you should come on the next podcast with us.
Rick, I will be glad. You know what? let's talk about this. Bring me out to St. John's. We'll talk about it. I'll bring a bucket load of wristbands for you, red wristbands for St. John's. We can talk about it there like men.
That'd be a fascinating guy to talk to. I mean, there's warts there, obviously, but to be successful for so long at so many different schools, just unbelievable.
Yeah, now I wish that he had made some different choices personally about some things.
Yeah.
But as a basketball coach, it doesn't get much better than him. He's absolutely a great coach. He could sell, ketchup popsicles to a woman wearing white gloves.
Yeah.
I mean, he can sell anything. But that's a great example too of, we do put people on pedestals and they're humans and they make mistakes, but by and large, I think the stuff that he says and at least from a basketball standpoint has been great. And he's been a good model of a basketball coach, at least.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, one of the reasons Dustin and I started doing this ICP thing is we were young coaches without a lot of resources that leaned on each other, but had a lot of expensive experience, where if we had a mentor, it might have changed the game for us a little bit. In your work now, you're getting touch points with a lot of coaches, I assume a lot of ADs. What are the common mistakes you're seeing by young coaches of saying, hey, dude, if you'd avoid these two things or just listen to me, your life's going to be a lot better? What comes to mind?
It's not just young coaches, Rob.
Yeah,
I mean, it's older coaches, veteran coaches, successful coaches, like wins and losses wise, they still struggle. The two biggest ones that come to mind right away is I don't think we're coachable. Mm-hmm. We want our athletes to be coachable, but we're not coachable. We're stuck in our ways. Hey, this is the way it's always been done. Hey, I'm smarter than you. Well, shoot, you should be smarter than your athletes. That's not the question. The question is, it's not about are you right? It's about are we right? Are we going in the right direction? And a lot of times as coaches, man, I want to be right. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Sometimes we're dead right. Yeah, I'm right, but I turn off my team. Yeah, I'm the know-it-all. And that's how I was my first coaching experience. I mean, I was a young coach. My second year, I'm coach of the year in the conference with 16 teams in it. I'm coach of the year. And the fourth year, they allowed me to take my talents elsewhere. I was too stubborn and not coachable. So coachability is one of the biggest things. The second thing, and we kind of talked about this earlier, but I think as leaders, and we see a terrible example from our politicians who are supposed to be leaders. We see a terrible example from our coaches as well, or our teachers, or our administrators in school. Leaders, it may not be your fault, but it's 100% your responsibility to figure out solutions and to find a way to move forward, to get the best out of people. Good leaders make situations and people better. It's not about blame. It's not about credit. It's about moving us forward and getting us where we need to be. And I think leaders, whether it's politicians, coaches, CEOs, we're so worried about who's right, who's wrong, who gets the credit, who gets the blame. No, it's about making situations better. Yes, there is a part of we've got to figure out why this went wrong, but oftentimes we are responsible for that. Yes, if I'm a CEO of a large company, I may not know what's going on at the ground level, but I'm responsible for hiring the person who hired the person who hired the person. I know that gets kind of convoluted. But ultimately, we are responsible as leaders. And I don't think, especially taking it down to the coach level or even the AD level, we forget that. Well, it's not my fault. It's not my fault my coach did this. Or if you're a head coach, it's not my fault. Going back to Rick Pitino, I was always amazed. And sorry, Rick. Once again, Rick, I'd be glad to talk to you about this. Bring me out to New York. We'll talk. I was always amazed when they got in trouble at Louisville and he put the blame on the assistant. I didn't know the assistant was doing this. Well, you're the head coach, not just a head coach. You're Rick Pitino.
Yeah.
You're either responsible for training up your people to know exactly what's expected, what the standards are, or you're responsible for being aware of what your people are doing. Mm-hmm. Either way, you're responsible for that. So you've got to figure out a way to move us in the direction that we have to go. And so coachability and then being responsible, that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah. I've never heard it said. I really, one thing that's always bothered me is when like a CEO or head coach or oh, this was all my fault. No, it wasn't. You weren't there, but I love the saying of it's your responsibility, not my fault, but my responsibility. And how do we move forward? I think that's,
Yeah, I'm not responsible for what, or I'm not, I might not be at fault because I wasn't there, but I'm responsible because I'm the leader of this program. And we're going to figure out how to fix this, or we're going to find a solution. I'm going to work with these people. We're going to make sure that, you know what, I don't have a time machine. I can't get in the Wayback Machine and change what happened. But I'm going to guarantee you, we're going to minimize the chance of this happening again in the future. We're going to put this, and this in place so this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. It happens all the time at a college. You get a violation. It might be a small violation, but you can't go back and fix what happened. You played that ineligible player 4 years ago. But are there some guardrails that you can now put into place that this doesn't happen, or it minimizes the chances of happening going forward? So taking responsibility doesn't mean that it was your fault, and it doesn't mean you can change what happened. But it does mean we're going to minimize the chances of it going forward. Or you know what? Maybe I've got to do some different stuff. I've got to hire differently, or I've got to evaluate differently. I've got to hold people accountable in a different way.
And I think that's a message for young coaches too, of unless it's extreme behavior and very inappropriate behavior, I want to help you as your boss, walk you through the tough stuff. And how do we get better from it? And I find people at times scared to share those things. And unless the obvious extreme behavior, it's like, yeah, you're going to mess up, and let's take responsibility and figure out how to do better.
Yeah. And when it comes to, like you mentioned, coaching searches earlier, I see so many athletic directors or people in the hiring manager, people in a position to hire. They do one of two things wrong. Either they hire the wrong person for a number of reasons, or they don't train the person. And you see this sometimes. They hire a person with a ton of potential, maybe a younger person, a younger coach or an experienced coach who has a lot of potential, but then they don't equip them. They don't enable them to do their job in the right way. They don't enrich them or enhance them. So they have the skill. It's like bringing in a basketball player or an athlete, a raw athlete, and then they can't do some of these fundamentals. You get mad at them, 3 months later because they can't do X, Y, or Z. And it's like, well, you knew that, and you brought them in, but then you didn't help them get better at that area. If that's what you're going to be evaluating them on. So we need to make sure we're hiring the right people, or we're definitely equipping them the right way.
Yeah, right on. Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap us up here. We always wrap up with a rapid fire round with a new guest. I used to send the questions. I don't anymore. So sucks to be you. But here's the rule. You only have 30 seconds or less to answer each question.
All right.
And I will cut you off only if the answer is not good. So here we go. What is a book or books that have most greatly influenced your life?
7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Dr. Stephen Covey. A book by Harvey Mackay, Dig Your Well Before You Are Thirsty. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And then any John Maxwell book.
Nice. I never heard of Dig Your Well. I'll check that out. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Or phrased differently, do you have a favorite failure?
Yeah, for me, that's an easy one. Getting fired after my first head coaching job, especially after being coach of the year. I talked with a mentor of mine right after I got fired. He said, this is your opportunity to be bitter or better. Your teams 5 or 10 years from now will be better because of how you respond to this setback.
In your current work, how do you define success?
Yeah, it's being the best that you're capable of being. I kind of stole that, somewhat paraphrasing it from John Wooden. But what is your potential? And then doing the best you're capable of to reach that potential. And it's going to look different for everybody. And it's also going to look different for Jamy Bechler or Rob at different points in their career as well.
Right on. Last one. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? I'll say it again. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
This is the one that came to mind the first. I'm not sure it's the most important, but I've started scheduling. I have to schedule all phone calls, podcast interviews, everything. I have to schedule everything on my calendar or else it won't get done being an entrepreneur. But I've started scheduling 45-minute phone calls instead of an hour. So 45 minutes, that has meant a ton to my daily schedule and been more efficient and got more productivity out of just scheduling 45 minutes instead of hour-long phone calls.
Sounds stupid. I did the same thing. Life-changing.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hey, this has been awesome. Any final thoughts before we call it wraps?
I just appreciate you letting me come on, and I know you have a lot of leaders, educators watching this. So I encourage you guys, keep fighting, keep growing, keep developing, and stay encouraged. What you're doing matters. It may not always seem that way, especially when you're dealing with young adults or teenagers, but stay encouraged because it does matter.
Right on. And if people want to follow up with you, we'll put your contact stuff in the show notes, but where can they look you up if they want to look you up?
Yeah, if you're a twit, if you like to be on Twitter a little bit, at Coach Bechler. At Coach Bechler is where I spend most of my time.
Okay, cool. All righty, Jamie, have a great day, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Rob.
All right.